From the shadows of insignificance to the forefront of change, this is a story of resilience, courage, and justice. Imagine being the person everyone overlooked, the one dismissed, ignored, treated as if they didn't matter. Now imagine that same person rising above it all to make a difference. This is the story of Sarah Collins, a waitress who refused to turn a blind eye to injustice, a woman who risked everything to stand for what was right. But the real question is, what would you have done in her place? Would you have the courage to defy the norm, even if it meant putting everything on the line? Stay with us until the end, and if this story touches your heart, comment the 68 below. Sarah Collins spent her days at Riverside Diner, a timeless American eatery where black and white checkered floors gleamed under neon lights, and red vinyl booths offered a cozy refuge for weary travelers. The air was thick with the mouth-watering aroma of sizzling burgers, crispy bacon, and freshly brewed coffee. A familiar, comforting scent that wrapped around truckers, families, and night shift workers like a warm embrace. The jukebox hummed a nostalgic tune in the background, blending seamlessly with the clatter of plates and the low murmur of conversations. To the outside world, it was the picture of a classic, welcoming diner. But beneath the surface, a different reality thrived, one built on favoritism, discrimination, and unspoken power plays. Sarah had always kept her head down, her focus on the customers she served rather than the unfairness around her. She told herself that as long as she did her job well, none of it really mattered. But all of that changed on one fateful night, a night that would alter everything. It was a Friday evening, the busiest time of the week. The diner pulsed with life, filled with the steady rhythm of silverware clinking against plates, the sizzle of meat on the grill, and the murmur of laughter and conversation. The rich scent of coffee mingled with the savory aroma of fried food, creating an intoxicating atmosphere. Sarah had been working for hours, her legs aching, her body running on sheer determination. There was no time to stop. Orders piled up, tables needed attention, and she had to keep moving. Across the diner, Lisa and Brad leaned against the counter, laughing and chatting, completely unbothered by the chaos around them. They had the luxury of picking and choosing whom they wanted to serve, ignoring the tables they deemed unworthy of their attention. The moment a businessman in a tailored suit walked in, Lisa straightened, her professional smile instantly in place. "Bet he tips big," Brad muttered, with a knowing smirk. Then another man stepped inside. He was middle-aged, dressed neatly but modestly in a button-down shirt and dark slacks. His presence wasn't commanding, nor did he carry himself with the air of someone demanding attention. But there was something about him, something quiet yet observant, as if he was taking in every detail of the room. Lisa barely glanced in his direction before turning away. Brad didn't even acknowledge him. The hostess hesitated for a brief moment, then shifted her gaze elsewhere. No one moved to greet him. No one acknowledged his presence. The message was clear: he wasn't important enough. A familiar knot formed in Sarah's stomach. She had seen this happen before. Customers being sized up and silently judged based on their appearance, their assumed status. It was an unwritten rule at Riverside Diner, one that Mark, the manager, never spoke of, but certainly never discouraged. It wasn't just about money, it was about perception. Who looked like they belonged? Who looked like they were worth the effort? The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The man remained patient, but Sarah could see the subtle shift in his expression. He knew exactly what was happening. Every instinct told her to stay quiet, to blend into the background like she always did. Speaking up could mean trouble, could mean risking the job she desperately needed. But as she looked at the man standing there, waiting for someone to acknowledge his existence, she felt something stir deep inside her. Enough. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped forward. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Welcome to Riverside Diner. What can I get for you?" For a moment, the man simply looked at her. His gaze was calm, searching, as if he was trying to understand her, trying to see if her kindness was real. Then a slow smile formed on his lips. "Well," he said, his voice smooth and composed, "it's nice to finally be noticed." Something in Sarah's chest tightened. Relief, maybe even a flicker of pride. She took his order, making sure to note every detail. As she moved to prepare his meal, she felt the weight of the stairs behind her. Lisa rolled her eyes dramatically. Brad muttered something under his breath, and Mark, standing near the kitchen, watched her in silence, his expression unreadable. Sarah knew what this meant, knew that by choosing to serve this man, she had crossed an invisible line. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't care, because sometimes doing the right thing was worth the risk. From obscurity to leadership, this is a story of courage, integrity, and the unexpected turns life takes. Have you ever felt invisible, overlooked, dismissed, treated as though your presence held no weight? Now imagine stepping beyond that shadow, facing injustice head-on and daring to make a difference. This is the story of Sarah Collins, a waitress who risked everything for what was right. But the real question is, what would you have done in her place? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have stood for justice, even if it cost you everything? Stay with us until the end, and if this story resonates with you, comment the number 68 below. Sarah Collins spent her days working at Riverside Diner, a place that, on the surface, felt like a warm embrace of nostalgia. Black and white checkered floors stretched across the room, red vinyl booths cradled weary travelers, and neon lights hummed with a soft glow. The scent of sizzling burgers, crispy bacon, and freshly brewed coffee hung thick in the air, a comforting aroma that wrapped around truckers, families, and night shift workers alike. In the corner, the jukebox played a tune lost in time, mingling with the chatter of customers and the clinking of dishes. But beneath that inviting facade, the reality was different. A silent, suffocating hierarchy ruled the diner. Favoritism, discrimination, power games. Sarah had always kept her head down. She served with care, treating every customer with the same warmth, regardless of who they were. It wasn't because she was oblivious to the injustice. It was because she didn't have the luxury to fight it. She had bills to pay, responsibilities she couldn't ignore. But one night changed everything. It was a Friday evening, the peak of the dinner rush. The diner was alive with the symphony of voices, the clatter of silverware against plates, and the steady sizzle of the grill. The air was thick with the mingling scents of fried food and fresh coffee, a smell so familiar it had become part of Sarah's skin. She had been on her feet for hours, exhaustion clinging to her like a second skin. But there was no time to rest. Orders still needed to be taken, tables cleared, customers served. Across the room, Lisa and Brad leaned against the counter, laughing, unconcerned with the chaos around them. They had the privilege of choosing who deserved their attention, who was worth serving. The moment a businessman in a crisp, tailored suit walked in, Lisa straightened, flashing a bright, polished smile. "Betty tips big," Brad muttered with a smirk. Then another man entered. He wasn't flashy, middle-aged, dressed neatly but modestly, a button-down shirt, dark slacks. His posture was relaxed, hands tucked in his pockets, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with quiet awareness. There was something about him, something that set him apart. Lisa barely spared him a glance before turning away. Brad didn't acknowledge him at all. The hostess at the front hesitated, then looked elsewhere. No one moved to greet him. No one even acknowledged he existed. Sarah felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She had seen this before, seen the way customers were silently judged, dismissed based on the way they looked, the way they carried themselves. It was an unspoken rule at Riverside Diner, one the manager, Mark, had never addressed. Maybe he even encouraged it. Seconds stretched into uncomfortable silence. The man remained still, waiting, but Sarah could tell. He knew what was happening. She could do what she'd always done. Keep quiet. Keep moving. Pretend she didn't see what was right in front of her. Or she could do something different. She took a steadying breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice steady, her smile genuine. "Welcome to Riverside Diner. What can I get for you?" For a moment, he simply looked at her. His gaze held something unreadable, something searching, as if he was trying to understand her, trying to see if her kindness was real. Then slowly a small smile formed on his lips. "Well," he said, voice smooth and measured, "it's nice to finally be noticed." Something inside Sarah shifted. a quiet sense of rightness. She took his order, making sure she got every detail correct. The burger cooked exactly as he wanted, the fries extra crispy, the coffee freshly brewed. As she worked, she could feel the weight of eyes on her. Lisa rolled her eyes. Brad muttered something under his breath, and Mark, standing near the kitchen entrance, watched her in stony silence. When she placed the tray in front of the man, he nodded in appreciation. "That was quick," he remarked, lifting his coffee cup, turning it slightly in his hands. Sarah smiled. "We try our best." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You have a good attitude, you know that." The compliment caught her off guard. "I just believe in treating people right," she replied simply. His gaze held hers, something thoughtful flickering in his eyes. "That's a rare quality," he said. He took a sip of his coffee, then added, "And I think you deserve more than what you've been given." Sarah blinked. Her heart stuttered. She didn't know how to respond. Across the room, Mark's fingers drummed against the counter. His expression darkened. Sarah knew what that meant. She had just put a target on her back. The next morning, she was called into Mark's office. The air inside was thick with tension, heavy with the scent of stale coffee. Half-drawn blinds cast uneven slashes of light across the room. Papers were scattered across his desk in disorganized piles. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his face a mask of indifference. "We've decided to make some cuts," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Effective immediately, you're let go." Sarah froze. The breath caught in her throat. "What? But why?" She already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it. Mark sighed, shaking his head as if she were nothing more than a troublesome child. "Let's just say your attitude doesn't align with company values." There it was, the unspoken rule of Riverside Diner. Fall in line or get out. Her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to argue, to demand fairness, to fight back. His office slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the diner, leaving behind a stunned silence. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. The moment was victorious, but deep down she knew it was just the beginning. Mark was gone, but the battle was far from over. From the moment Sarah took charge, Lisa and Brad resisted her authority. Having worked under Mark's lenient management for years, they had grown comfortable in a system that rewarded favoritism and discouraged accountability. They had thrived in the old ways, choosing who to serve, taking extended breaks, dodging responsibility without consequence. Now, with Sarah enforcing fairness, efficiency, and respect, they saw her as a threat. At first, their defiance was subtle. Orders were mysteriously delayed. Meals arrived at tables cold. Employees whispered behind Sarah's back, questioning if she was fit to lead. A family of 4 sat at their booth for 40 minutes before Lisa begrudgingly brought their food, lukewarm, hastily prepared. A man at the counter had to ask twice for a simple cup of coffee, while Brad moved at a deliberately slow pace, smirking as customers grew increasingly frustrated. Sarah saw right through it. She knew they wanted to break her, to make her snap under the pressure. But instead of reacting with anger, she remained calm. She worked twice as hard, personally stepping in to fix mistakes, apologizing to customers, and ensuring that employees willing to do their jobs were supported. Slowly, a shift began to take place. Employees who had once been too afraid to stand up to Lisa and Brad started following Sarah's lead. Order returned. The work atmosphere lightened. But just as things seemed to improve, another problem arose. One morning, Sarah arrived early to review inventory logs. Something wasn't adding up. Ingredients were disappearing. Supplies were going missing. This wasn't just negligence. It was sabotage. That evening, just before closing, she called a staff meeting. Standing before them, her voice was calm but firm. "I know what's been happening. I know some of you are deliberately making mistakes. I know about the missing supplies. And I know you think this will break me. But here's the truth. It won't. This diner deserves better. Our customers deserve better. If you're with me, let's make this place great. If not, you know where the door is." A heavy silence filled the room. Lisa and Brad exchanged glances, their confidence visibly shaken. A few employees shifted uncomfortably. Then one by one, some began nodding. Determination flickered in their eyes. That night, Sarah sensed a turning point. By the end of the second week, Lisa's influence started to crumble. Employees who once followed her blindly began siding with Sarah. Orders ran smoother, customers noticed the change, and tips improved. Brad, realizing the tide had turned, quit. Lisa, stubborn as ever, clung to her position for as long as she could. But eventually, even she had to face reality. One evening, she grabbed her coat, cast one last bitter glare around the room, and walked out, slamming the door behind her. A month later, Riverside Diner had transformed. Customers noticed. Employees thrived. The toxic atmosphere that had once poisoned the place was gone. And Sarah, she had done more than fix a broken system. She had proven that leadership wasn't about control. It was about integrity, resilience, and the courage to stand against what was wrong. But the journey was far from over. One evening, James called her to the same cafe where it had all begun. When Sarah stepped inside, she could feel it. This was more than a casual meeting. James sat in his usual corner, a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him. The cafe was quieter than usual, the low hum of jazz drifting softly through the air. He gestured for her to sit. "You didn't just fix a restaurant, Sarah," he said, his tone measured. "You proved that leadership is about fairness and courage. That's why I have another offer for you." Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What kind of offer?" James took a sip of his coffee before speaking. "I want you to oversee multiple locations. Not just one restaurant, but several. There are more places just like Riverside Diner, where toxic leadership and unfair practices have gone unchecked for too long. I need someone who can change that. Someone like you." Sarah inhaled sharply, the weight of his words sinking in. Running one restaurant had felt like an uphill battle. Now he was offering her something even bigger, something she had never dared to dream for herself. James leaned in slightly, his gaze steady. "I need leaders who can reshape this company from the inside out. You've already proven you can dismantle corruption. Now I want you to take that same fire and apply it on a larger scale." She thought about the people she had helped, the culture she had changed. Maybe she had been limiting herself all along. With a deep breath, she turned back to James, determination burning in her eyes. "When do I start?"